Welcome to Northwest Tech Show. I'm Dave Duncan, and this is a show where we talk about technology and how a better understanding of it can help you have better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. We're going to kick things off, as we like to do, with a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at Twit TV.
This is Twit.
It has officially happened. Facebook has announced that it is rebranding, I guess. The company's rebranding and going by the name Meta now. Apparently, Mark Zuckerberg says that Meta has its root in meaning beyond. And so Facebook is going beyond what it was originally into so much more. And joining us again after the break to talk about everything that Facebook has announced thus far at its Connect event is Alex Kantrowitz of the Big Technology Podcast. Welcome back to the show, Alex.
Great to be back. Thanks again for having me.
Yes. So let's get into things. Let's start with this name thing, because I think this is the big kind of kickoff. And as you said earlier, name change isn't super important. It's about what other changes might come with it. But with this name change, a lot of the early rumors about it surrounded the reasoning behind it. And I'm curious if you also feel that this is Facebook trying to get out from under the way that folks seem to feel about Facebook and the ties that it has to spreading misinformation, or to, as you mentioned even earlier, how it was supposed to improve upon casual conversation, but has resulted in everyone yelling at each other. Is this change about the company trying to broaden its horizons? I guess the pun is intended there. Or is it about simply rebranding to get away from the name Facebook?
There was a Indiana Pacers player. His name was Ron Artest, and he was a bit of a hothead and got into some trouble when he went into the stands. You know, after a fan threw a cup of I think it was like beer on him, and him and his fellow teammates sort of got into it with the fans. And he was suspended for a large chunk of the season. There was just a documentary about this on Netflix. And he ended up changing his name from Ron Artest to Meta World Peace. And, by changing his name to Meta World Peace, he decided that, he didn't want to be associated with that player that would jump into the stands. He wanted to be someone who believed in tranquility and good things for the globe. And that, I believe, is what we're seeing with Facebook today, where, they have endured a long series of scandals. And for them, they want to change this narrative. They take their suspension, although they've really kept going, and come back and be Meta, just like Ron Artest. And so that's what I think is happening. For them, it's hard to say. I mean, certainly took everybody's attention off of the Frances Haugen stuff for a minute. But if you're a corporate branding expert, you'd probably be like, all right, well, it doesn't hurt, Facebook. I mean, it's not going to get much worse. So go for it. And that's what we're seeing.
That's today. A good point. Yeah, not going to get much worse. That's a really good point. All right, so we've got Facebook rebranding as Meta, and the reason why Facebook says that is, again, going beyond everything, et cetera. And the metaverse is this huge hashtag of a word that has come out, particularly surrounding Facebook. This idea that you would have this, be it this mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality space where you could exist with other people. But Facebook's focus seems to be surrounding kind of the business side of the metaverse. Can you talk about kind of what you know about Facebook's ongoing plans for the metaverse? I know, again, a lot of this was just announced today, but the rumors leading up to this surrounding the metaverse and Zuckerberg's early conversations about it, you might have some insights there, because I'm curious the kind of the consumer side of things for the metaverse and what we can expect, but then also the business side of things and what everyone can expect in terms of, will there be ads flying at our face while we're trying to hang out with our sister from across the country?
Well, here's the most important thing. The thing I think has been most overlooked is that, and I think Zuckerberg was so explicit about it today that we're no longer going to overlook it, But Facebook hates being subject to the whims of Apple. Facebook and Apple really don't like each other. Facebook doesn't like Apple's fee. It doesn't like the fact that, Apple, it's subject to Apple's rules and regulations. In fact, looking back, that Apple took Facebook's internal apps offline because it violated some Apple policy, and Facebook couldn't work for a day because of that. So there's absolutely no love lost between Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg. And what Zuckerberg wants is a world where he's free of intermediaries that will mediate the relationship between him and his users. And so why is Facebook so taken with this idea for the metaverse, something that, basically has us living in VR and doing all of our computing there? And it's because Facebook controls the operating system. And he was very explicit in his talk today, talking about how, when it comes to the metaverse, there will be low fees. It will be developer friendly. You can sideload apps. I mean, it felt to me like a 1 hour long subtweet of Apple's business practices. Mm-hmm. And Apple's come at Facebook hard, right? They've also cut off the company's ability largely to target ads off of the app and to track people off the app, which has really hit Facebook's business, although we didn't see it so bad in this most recent earnings report. And so, Facebook, I actually broke news last week that Facebook said it wants to have a knife fight with Apple, right? And so this is the knife fight. This is what we're watching. It's two of the biggest companies, two of the most powerful companies that we have in this country and the world, taking their knives out and getting to stabbing. And this is Facebook's attempt to stab back at Apple.
That makes sense. Yes, there was, as you put it, sort of a subtweet section where they were talking about how they see the metaverse existing and how it won't do this, that, and the other. And all of the things that they were mentioning were all of the things that people criticize Apple's App Store practices about. So that was interesting to see. They brought on a creator or a creative, I guess, who they were talking to about doing sort of makeup and cosmetics in the metaverse and how people would pay for the privilege of purchasing products that would be exclusive to them in the metaverse. And so we can kind of sort of picture that future. But there was a huge focus on the business side of things too, of the space where we have corporate kind of creating metaverse spaces where people can go and work together. And I'm curious if you think that this is more of a result of, our pandemic living, or if the metaverse kind of always, in the same way that HoloLens, it started out as maybe it was going to be a consumer product, and they realized that Microsoft's HoloLens was better for sort of the corporate area. Do we think that's the same thing here, where eventually it would have been some sort of corporate technology, but they just got there faster because of the pandemic? Or what are just your thoughts in general on their focus on the business side of things?
Well, I think that Facebook did a good job setting expectations at the very beginning, where they said, this isn't stuff we're going to roll out right now. It's not a typical developer conference. We're really going to lay out our vision for the future. And I think that's particularly important because you think about their vision for the future. This is something that's going to not happen this year, not happen next year, but it might happen 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road. VR technology simply is just not at the point where it's going to be something that people would rather get into virtual reality versus, talking to somebody on a Zoom or in person. In person is still pretty cool. I hate to break it to the folks at Facebook, but people still like the real world. And, virtual reality, like if this stuff was going to take off, why didn't it take off during the pandemic? We were all stuck at home. It would have been amazing. And it's just the fact that the technology isn't anywhere close to where it needs to be. So I think there is a good case to be made that, maybe 5, 10 years down the line, we will maybe conduct some meetings in virtual reality. Maybe put on AR glasses and have some hologram of our coworker beam in to the conference table with us. But I do think that it's important in this discussion to just highlight the fact that it's going to take a long, long time to get to this place. And so, I personally, we're here at Big Technology, and, we're tech forward. We like to use tech in the workplace. But I swear to you, I'm not asking anyone to meet with me in virtual reality anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm not feeling that either, and I actually really enjoy the virtual reality experience. One question I have about this, I'm curious to know your take on this. Right now, the VR that we know, the VR that the metaverse, as Zuckerberg kind of spelled out today, runs on the Quest and the Quest 2 headset, which runs on Android, which is owned by Google. How important is it, do you think, for Facebook to eventually build its own operating system to control its entire destiny here? Or is that even necessary? What do you think about that?
It's a really good question. Look, I sat with Mark Zuckerberg and talked to him about this when I was reporting out Always Day One. And he talked about the fact that, a lot of operating systems doesn't give you the control that you would like, especially if you're a company like Facebook, to interact with your users in a way that you think is best. So to give you an example. So Zuckerberg told me that the thing is with apps, in a phone operating system, you pick you pick the app, and then you pick the person you want. So you pick the action, and then you pick the person you want to do it with. In real life, you pick the person first, right? Hey, let's hang this weekend, and then you pick the action that you want to take. So I think that like he wants that control. Obviously, building on Android allows you a much greater level of control than being an app on the iPhone. And for them, the most important key is to have a paradigm shift where we go from using our phones to using virtual reality. And as soon as we get there, if they're controlling that number one headset, sort of doesn't matter what the underlying operating system is, as long as it allows them to customize, Android will. And so then that's a win for them.
I guess my last question for you is, along with the shift in the name, you mentioned there could be some other changes that take place at the company. Do we think anything else will happen outside of the name change as Facebook continues to focus on the metaverse and sort of what's next in social space?
Yeah, look, I thought there was a chance that Chris Cox was going to become, who's the chief product officer of Facebook, was going to become the CEO of Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg was going to become the chairman/CEO of Meta. That hasn't happened. So obviously, Zuck still has full control, and outside of that, there is some corporate like restructure or corporate re-emphasis that's going on. Reality Labs is going to lead them into the future. This week, Zuckerberg also talked about the fact that it's all about, focusing on young users, and they don't care as much about boomers. I'm paraphrasing, but that was sort of the way he put it. And so that's what the future for Facebook is going to look like. It's going to be about young adults. If you look through some of those Facebook papers, you can see that Facebook has a serious problem with the kids. And so it's going to work to fix that, and then try to put this, Reality Labs, the Portal, the Oculus, and then augmented reality front and center. But it's a risky bet because social media is live and thriving. There's 3.5 billion plus people that use Facebook's family of apps, much less using these devices. So and also less of a use case and less of an immediate payoff. So the growth numbers will look good because you're starting from a really small base. But overall, it will be tough for them to turn their Reality Labs into the same blockbuster success as business-wise, at least, that Facebook has been. And so what it gives us is another 5 years of extremely interesting stories and plot lines with this, persistently compelling company. And so here we go.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was Tech News Weekly 207, Facebook Meta announcements. So, yeah, we speculated a little bit on this last week, and now we know we've got, all right, here's what it really is. And fairly close. As he said, the one thing that people were speculating on was that Mark Zuckerberg might kick himself upstairs to run Meta and have someone else step in as CEO for Facebook. That hasn't happened. That is a very delicate beach ball that Mark is balanced upon, because he set up, and I think a couple of other companies have tried to do this since he did it, but he's arranged things so that his voting stock remains the majority no matter how many shareholders come on board. So pretty good trick to pull if you can. So he can never be voted out by the the shareholders or he can never be pushed out by the board because he has the majority voting stake in the company at all times. And that might be I could just see in him trying to slip off of one horse onto another. There have to be people that have been laying in wait for decade, trying to undo that little loophole that Mark Zuckerberg has arranged for himself, aka Emperor of Social Earth. So it was interesting to hear him talk about, it's like, put all the things that they were talking about in the announcement in the context of, here are all the things that people complain about Apple about, and we're going to be able to bypass them now, is essentially what he was pitching. An alternate ecosystem, and just more direct contact in general. I, for one, am a little uncomfortable with that corporate culture having direct access to every blink and sway of head that you can track in the virtual reality goggles like Oculus or now Meta Quest. That's microphone and headphones, so it's like all the conversations you're having with people too. I mean, I guess a little bit like Messenger, but this is actual real-time audio communications. Body language and all that in virtual form. And essentially, as this becomes the platform for living on, just like at first we had the operating systems. Okay, you had Mac, you had Windows, you had Linux, and a couple of other off-brands. And that defined your world. It's like, okay, you're in Windows world, and that's everything you're going to do is controlled by Microsoft, or you're in the Mac world, and everything you do is controlled by Apple, and you have to figure which benevolent dictator you want to live under. And Windows a little less so, because their philosophy was more to have the system be fairly open. After early Microsoft went away, as we talked about a little bit last week, pre-antitrust lawsuits, Microsoft was pretty brutal. They would do things like say, well, if you want to be able to sell Microsoft computers, loaded up ready to go with Microsoft Windows, then you can't sell any other computers with the competing operating system. It's like, okay, that's a pretty heavy anvil. It's like, okay, you can either sell the 90% market leader, or you can sell the minority one. You can't do both. And then when they kind of took over the browser market in Europe, they had more action against them, so that when you installed Windows, you had to present a menu of all the major browsers available and pick which one you wanted to use, and show them in random order, so that Microsoft's own browser didn't have an advantage, because that was seen as a big deal, and it increasingly did become a big deal as the browser became the operating system. All the Web 2.0 and onward, what e-commerce stuff that people want to do online, it really depends on their browser supporting the site. And so sites would build to one browser or another. And currently, they build so much to Chrome, which is a Google product, that everyone else has just kind of given up. They just said, well, even if we run in a browser, we're going to run the Google engine underneath it. So we might have some ability to control, where the web search bar goes or something. But other than that, we're just kind of putting a wrapper on what Google's putting out for actually, what websites can be supported. And, there's still a few renegades. I think Brave, notable among them, that had a very different model of how to do browsing, and, works pretty hard on compatibility. But, it's kind of a system now where it's like, okay, if you're not the leader, then you can be the leader of the resistance. You can be the major browser that isn't the leader browser, just for people that want to have some kind of choice. So that's a good market to get into, but you're never going to catch up to the leader. And now, as you know, we had Android versus Apple, and Android versus iOS, which was essentially Google versus Apple, and that's kind of shaken out. And now the the VR headsets is the next big platform decision. Are you on the Facebook or now Meta site, or are you on one of the others? They've kind of they came up from behind Vive. HTC Vive had a pretty good position, and I think they just threw money at it because they dropped the price to really a ridiculous level, like a level you should only be able to achieve after you have made a major market, and they just haven't done that yet. And yet they've dropped the price anyway, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're selling headsets at cost or below cost just to capture the space. And Mark has kind of declared this is where he wants to rule, and he's tried to put it out in a humble package, but you really have to look at their track history to determine what's true. They were openly brash at one point. As they get beat up more and more, they tend to talk a little nicer, but time will tell if they actually turn that corner. For Microsoft, it took a really, really long and painful antitrust process for them to start to develop that thing like, even if we can get away with stuff, we don't really want to go through that process again. Ultimately nothing happened to them, but the process itself was the punishment. So, Facebook has not yet had that, Facebook/Meta has not yet had that moment where they've really, really suffered for what they've done, for the shortcuts they've taken, for the promises they backtracked on, for the, as they were very proud of for quite some time, the move fast and break things. What they were breaking was inevitably people. When you're that big a company, your every mistake is going to hurt somebody a lot. And so it sort of behooves you to look like you actually cared somewhat about the consequences of your decisions, even though I'm pretty sure they do not. Zuckerberg has, to some sense, picked up some semblance of the ethos of the metaverse, of Snow Crash and Ready Player One and all that. And so we'll see how serious he is about it. But one thing we've seen in the past is, he decides how things should be and then kind of just brutally pushes towards that. He just, he decided that everyone should communicate very openly, and, he didn't care about people that maybe for domestic abuse reasons or for bigotry reasons, wanted to not use their real name or had changed their name and or having trouble getting Facebook to accept it, or they were from a culture that names didn't look real to Facebook. And then they had to, defend that. It's like, dude, if I tell you what my name is, if I've got any documentation that that's my name, that should be the end of it. But, that's not what's done. And then part of the theory of that was also that people would behave better when they were using their real names. And it turned out that wasn't true. People are going to be who they are, regardless of, if their name is attached to things or not. If they're a jerk in person, they're going to be a jerk online. People already knew their name when they became that person. So being online with a real name is not really going to make a huge difference. So it is good to know what is on Zuckerberg's mind as to what the new thing is the way he thinks it should be, because that's what's going to be forced upon us with a pretty large budget. And, one of the things is, he wants direct access to anyone using his services. He doesn't want any intermediaries that can, put rules on things that are different than the rules he wants to do and the freedoms he chooses to give himself. So, we'll be, usually a diverse ecosystem where, you get to choose the services and you get to choose the intermediaries, such as like what happened with Unfollow Everyone, the plugin where it's like a lot of people wanted to experience Facebook without the never-ending scroll of doom newsfeed of just everything that the algorithm chose to throw at them. And you could manually go in and unfollow hundreds or thousands of people without, unfriending them. So if you unfriend them, then you can't send messages back and forth to them as easily, and you can't go check up on their site when you feel like it. But, unfollow just says, hey, that does not have to be pushed in my face when that's not what I'm interested in. Maybe I want to follow a couple things and the rest, I don't want to know about them unless I, am actively like, okay, I'm going to catch up with Rick, so I need to go look at his page and see what's been going on lately. Fine, and then for the next year, you're not going to think about him. So why should you be seeing his every burp and fumble? Facebook just said nope. Someone came up with a way to change, to automatically just unfollow everyone, and then you could manually follow the people you want to. Not unfriend anyone, but just unfollow them so that they weren't automatically put in your news feed. And Facebook said nope, we're banning that plugin. Follow everyone was just something like, okay, I want to control my the way I perceive this thing, and Facebook's like, nope, we're gonna tell you how you're gonna perceive things. We're gonna make it very difficult to do what we don't want you to do, or even impossible. So, and we'll have to keep that in mind as we see Facebook expand, or Meta expand, into trying to envelop us in their kind of all-consuming virtual world. And it is a gamble. Now, I admire the risk-taking. Zuckerberg's been good at that. He was way back when he was just another social site like, something on the order of not even of MySpace yet at the time. And, was offered $2 billion for his company. And he's like, nope, I'm going to stay in charge of it. Like I said, he arranged a rather unique deal where he was in total control of his company, no matter what anyone felt about it. So no matter how big it got, no matter how many stakeholders there were, it was Mark Zuckerberg's voice was the only one that counted. And so maybe that's part of the formula. Maybe you can do some more, maybe you can succeed better, and maybe you can have a more pure product when only one person gets to decide ultimately what's going to go into it. Maybe ruling by committee is bad, but there's also, scale. At what point does something become not just another company, but become something akin to a government that you're living under, that's controlling all of your interactions with your friends and with business purchases and such. So at that point, it's like, is it still appropriate for one person unelected to have sole control over everything to do with it? I would say no. So that's the problem we're going to have to deal with, I think, in the coming decade, is how are we going to deal with companies that are big enough to dictate the terms of our life if they're allowed to go unchecked? All right, and with that, let's move on to the next clip here, another Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. This is This Week in Google 635, the tech push into our living rooms.
This is Twit.
We're kind of talking about living room stuff, so we could probably talk a little bit about this whole Google TV, YouTube, Roku. Actually, there seems to be a whole thing with smart TVs and the smart smart home, smart TVs, that sort of thing. So Google is shifting Google TV to be a bigger priority in the information had a report that said Pichai is really saying that connected television is a big priority for Google right now. They're paying partners more to use Google TV, so they're paying anywhere between $10 to $15 per unit for partners. Roku's paying, but then there's Roku paying $7 to $8. That ties into the fact that Google and Roku have been battling it out, and supposedly YouTube is apparently going to drop off of Roku in December. This all has to do with like a search deal that Google wanted Roku to give its YouTube property kind of prime search placement, its own carousel in the experience. Roku says, hey, that's affecting our search and we don't want to do that. And so now Google's pulling YouTube. I don't know if Google's pulling YouTube or Roku's kicking it off. I doubt they're kicking it off.
It doesn't matter. It's all negotiation.
Yeah, it's all negotiations and puffing up to try and win in the negotiation, I suppose. Then you've got Comcast. They have their own smart TV that's coming out now. It's going to be available at Walmart. It's powered by their own OS. And then Amazon has their own smart TV launching today, the Fire TV Omni series that you can find at Amazon and Best Buy. Suddenly, it seems like the living room's a really big deal. And it's just interesting to me because Google's had Android TV for quite a while, for years. Now that we're in the Google TV era, suddenly it seems like Google is taking the living room more seriously, and others obviously are too. Why is that?
Well,
why
I had an experience.
Pandemic. We wasn't in a pandemic 2 years ago, 3 years ago either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it's also the changing economics. I think you're right, Ant. I think that changed a lot. Our stream behavior changed, but the market changed too, right? The power of Netflix, power of Hulu, and so on and so forth. So the TV maker, the set maker, they've had the dumb box like the dumb wire all these years.
Yeah.
Right. And I suddenly realized with smart TV coming along. So I got my father, my 95-year-old father, who's up here in New Jersey now, and he just his retirement community has 60 channels. That's it. That's all they need. You got the golf channel? Thanks. That's all I need. And so, and the Fox News channel? Oh no, Pa, they don't have the Fox News channel. No, you can't get that here. You can't lie to your own father. Though. Well, anyway, so I just wanted a TV where he could watch TV. I go and buy a Vizio at Costco. I come back, I put it in. I'm tearing my hair out. I cannot get to the channels. It does nothing but want to sell me Hulu and sell me Netflix, and because it makes a commission on all of that. In addition, Vizio, a company we used to like, we own Vizio TVs. They also have been in some little minor PR hot water because they are, perhaps one might say, violating your privacy. They are using data to try to target advertising. And so you find that the television set, which was what we old folks used to call it, is itself now part of the stack, and they're trying to grab their piece of it. So that's why I think you have Comcast doing its own OS and its own TVs. You have Google saying, hold on, we're the giant of the internet. We can't lose out on this. And we got YouTube, and we got to worry that. You got Roku saying, well, no, we're the add-on that makes everything smart. You got Hulu and Netflix and all those saying, we just want volume. And then you got advertisers coming in saying, well, this whole targeting thing is getting to be a mess on the web. What can we do on TVs? So it's suddenly a roiling, fascinating, probably very irritating market. I returned the Vizio TV. I got an LG TV. I never set up the web stuff. And all it does is go to 60 channels. It's like kind of going back in time. So my father, we got him a big remote with big buttons, so we can go to 38, which is a golf TV, and that's all it needs. But that's the rarity, obviously. And so in a streaming world and a home war world, as Ann said, I think this market changes in fascinating ways.
Yeah, I think the streaming, I was going to say the same thing, that streaming, I think, really started to take off. Then Roku, I think, was kind of, not that people didn't notice, but nobody thought that was going to be a big deal. First they had the little boxes, and then it's in your TV. But then all of a sudden you watch the streaming numbers, you watch Netflix's growth, and then COVID comes, everybody's spending all their time inside. All of a sudden smart TVs look like a pretty great business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'm looking forward to Google TV hitting more TV sets, at least, because Google TV is a good interface. I think Google has made some really great changes to what was Android TV. Still don't really exactly know the difference between Android TV and Google TV.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
A new thing with a new UI, like it's
I have
kind
a
of confusing.
Chromecast, the newer ones, where it's basically like a Fire Stick. and I have that plugged into an old TV. And I was thinking about getting a new TV, and I asked one of our kids works at Best Buy. I said, can I get a stupid TV? Can I get one that has no smart features and I can just plug the Chromecast in? Yeah, you can't do that. You literally can't buy them.
Yeah, that's on the LG. I purposely didn't go and put in any Wi-Fi information so that it couldn't be smart.
Robot in our Discord. Robot in our Discord says every TV is a dumb TV when it doesn't know the Wi-Fi password.
That's true.
True.
That's true. You're still potentially dealing with weirdness in the interface and everything. Oh man, I have a Samsung. Mm-hmm. We have a Samsung smart TV, and the little ads that it puts in the dock down there, it's just like kill it with fire. Can't take it. But it is what it is. It is what it is. I wish I had Google TV on that screen instead.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Google 635 Tech Push into the Living Room. And so, in a way, this is kind of a follow-on to what we were talking about with Facebook, and Meta, that they, want to become the new platform, as technology moves on. Every time technology moves on, there's a new rebid to see, okay, who's going to control the platform. We were talking about, computer operating systems and cell phone operating systems and browsers and now, VR and TV. They're making it harder and harder to use a TV without hooking up the smart features. It's like, well, we know you got internet. We know you got internet, so hook us up, baby, or we're not going to do diddly squat. And as of now, I think there's usually some way through the minefield to get it to work without internet hookup directly to the TV. Because, I was like I have an Apple TV. And that's what I want to run all my apps through. I don't want a smart TV that's going to try to make me its a captive audience, and run everything through them and, consolidate experience. Like, no, I've already consolidated my experience and I'm happy with it. Just get out of my frickin' way. And as they were kind of implying there, perhaps if you do not hook up the smart features, then it's going to be running ads on the, popping up little boxes saying, hey, you seem to have forgotten to hook up the Wi-Fi, so remember you can do that. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. I had something similar like that with the Comcast box. It's like I do not use the features on the Comcast box. I've got TiVo for that, and yet it's trying to interject itself into my life. It's throwing I'm recording something on the TiVo, and I'll find all of a sudden in the middle of it, it's got some big black box where it's like, oh. This game is on. Do you want me to change the channel? It's like, no, I put it on the channel I wanted to, and I certainly didn't want a big black box covering 2/3 of the screen. Or saying, oh, well, we've decided to, go update the firmware on the box, and so we're just going to put up some splash screen or something like that. And, maybe, I was recording something, and it's like if you were not actively watching the channel in real time and punching buttons to tell us to stop doing something, we're going to go ahead and do some stuff that obstructs your ability to see the TV up to and including changing the channel. It's like, oh, we've temporarily lost the signal on this channel, so we're just going to go and tune you to a different channel. It's like, no, I wanted to record on that channel, and now, my recording is of the wrong place or gets interrupted in the middle because they decided they were going to, change it for me. So they do all these things to make life rough for us. But, as I had discovered in a recent conversation with a local tech, there are places here and there, and they're unfortunately few and far between, where they're like keeping up on the tech on how to override the company's wishes with the customer's wishes. Like if you break your screen and you on a phone and you want to use a third-party replacement, and they've got a special ROM in there to make the phone arbitrarily turn off like Face ID and maybe some other features just because it says, oh, you're using a third-party screen, so we're going to turn off Face ID. That makes any sense, right? So, the third-party repair places and factories in China and stuff have worked out a device to read the ROM of the broken screen, and to have come up with a replacement part that has an EEPROM in it that you can load that data into, and so then your phone thinks it's the original screen and doesn't mess with you arbitrarily, or there's one key part, like I think it's called a timer chip, that often goes out on game consoles, and it's got a lot of the protection part of their effort to prevent third-party repair shops from being able to fix things. And, they've figured out ways to bypass that. So the war goes on. There is a magnitude of difference sometimes between the resources of the companies and the customers trying to do their own thing. But as the tech accelerates and the small guys adapt first, it tends to close that gap a little bit. So that and in security, you always say the attacker has the advantage because they only have to find one hole in security, and security has to completely protect everything at the same time as trying to be functional. You can make a computer fairly secure by encasing it in cement and burying it in the ground under radioactive rubble or something, but you can't actually use it at that point. So it being secure doesn't do you a lot of good. I think at some point we just have to, address head on these battles where, and I think again, it comes to scale. When you have effective monopolies, when you have companies that are big enough to buy whatever laws they want, it becomes problematic for, consumers to, live their life and have reasonable products. You don't have a free market when people buy the referees of the market. So, we need to be aware of that and kind of, where we can, rein things in. And, the companies are run by people too. So having everyone hate them is one of the inputs on how far are we going to push this. As human beings that have some sort of sense that wrongdoing will be punished eventually, it can make these guys nervous enough. If there's enough outcry, even if there's really nothing we could ever do to them, they sometimes say, okay, it's not worth it, how uncomfortable. As much as I like making money, I also like being able to go out to dinner without, worrying that a mob's going to tar and feather me or something. So I think, again, this is one of those areas where an awareness of what's going on and, having some sense of what better futures could look like, and just expecting that of our political leaders, of the companies, of the people that we interact with socially, then we help bring those better futures into reality. All right, and speaking of the sci future, let's do one final Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. This is This Week in Tech 847, talking about the idea of an orbital reef space station.
This is Twit.
We saw that Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin's company and a couple of other partners, including Boeing, are now talking about, by the end of the decade, putting the first commercial space station into orbit, which they described as a mixed-use business park, part hotel, part business center, part research facility. It's a quite challenging a proposition, considering that Blue Origin can't get anything to orbit as yet with their current rocket systems. The passenger systems from Boeing haven't yet worked. Indeed, their passenger capsule is back at the factory because it failed on its last attempt to try and get into orbit. Brianna, Padre, do you think this is a viable idea, or should we be trying to build business parks in orbit? Go on, someone
Would I
jump in.
like them to? Yes. I mean, I'd love to see it because that's the vision of my childhood. Everyone's in a space station. Everyone's orbiting either the Earth or the Moon or in a Lagrange point. But as in terms of does it make financial sense? Not really. I think we've proven that with the ISS. Yes, there's some interesting experiments, but it's far too expensive to escape our gravity well to have anything in a business park just so that it can be in space. It's going to be a prestige thing. It's going to be something that's used by the wealthy so that they can do PR shoots. But other than that, I mean, it's not really viable. The level of technology that we have, not just booster tech, not just to get out of the gravity well so that you're actually in orbit and not just falling quickly, it's not there. And more so, it's not going to be there until we stop using chemical propellants. And neither Blue Origin nor SpaceX nor NASA or any of the agencies are anywhere near that level of technology. So interesting idea, sure, for science fiction, not in my lifetime.
Interesting. I mean, Brianna, if you got the chance for an orbital holiday, would you take it? And do you think anyone else?
Yeah.
Well, that was quick in a heartbeat. Yes.
Yeah. No, Frank and I talk about that all the time. Like this theoretical thing where an alien comes, you get to jump on a spaceship, like in Guardians of the Galaxy. You better believe I'm going. So Robert, I do share your pessimistic appraisal of the situation. I do think it's worth noting there are some unique things that can be done in space from a commercial standpoint. You know, my own husband works in biotech. I helped develop the coronavirus vaccine, and there are many kinds of drugs that could best be developed and manufactured in a zero-G environment. And there are all kinds of manufacturing issues like that. So I do think there's commercial value for that. I don't mean to get political, though, but this news does come out the exact same week that we are talking about a very substantial billionaire's tax here in the United States that would be almost impossible for them to avoid in the way that it's written. And, you know, personally, if I got to choose between Jeff Bezos developing a hotel in space or taxing Jeff Bezos so we could fund NASA much more aggressively and have the public weigh in and do a lot more space exploration and development there, I would choose B all day, every day. So I hope that's the way the dice rolls there.
Well, indeed.
Also, can I geek out for just a second here?
Go for it.
So when you're dealing with space, there's primarily two issues that we have right now. I mean, well, three. The first is the propellant, getting out of the gravity well. But if you're in orbit or even on a lunar body, power and heat. You build up heat and it's almost impossible to get rid of it. And your power budget is incredibly limited. So I'm big on manufacturing in space. I mean, I love the idea that there are certain things that can be made better in a zero-G environment. But having a zero-G environment that provide both the manufacturing capabilities and the power to run the equipment and the ability to remove the heat that the equipment generates, that's not just a business park. I mean, that's building a factory in space. So again, I mean, that's several factors of complexity above what's being proposed as a business park.
Well, this is it. I mean, I guess you get nuclear reactors up there to provide power so you don't have to rely on solar, but that's a whole new kettle of fish going on.
Well, see, even then, because our nuclear reactor power right now, unless you're dealing with a radiothermal isotope generator, is basically steam power. It's a steam plant that uses a nuclear fire instead of burning something. The problem is none of those plants work unless you can get rid of the heat. That's how you have to condense the water. So if you're in space, it actually becomes far more difficult to do something like nuclear power. I mean, essentially the only thing that works is solar. And you can't create enough PV space to run a standard factory with just solar power.
It's interesting. So are we going to have to wait for the space elevator, or is it, you know?
I'm all about the space elevator. Give me the space elevator, please. Or just a big railgun so I can shoot payloads into low Earth orbit.
Well, I mean, Brianna you raised an interesting point on this, because you're right. The billionaire tax proposals did come out this week. Obviously, the tech industry is very likely, you know, the leaders of the tech industry are right in the firing line on this. I mean, from the proposals that they have, it doesn't. I mean, it's not as though Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos is going to be hanging around with a cup outside Grand Central Station, trying to pay off the mortgage that way. But I mean, it does seem a bit rich that well, particularly for Elon Musk, has been very vocal against it this week, and considering the guy did get a certain amount of government subsidies just to get his business off the ground, quite literally, it does seem slightly mawkish just to say, well, actually, yeah, but I'm not that keen on this tax business. I mean, do you think it's going to go through? Is Congress actually going to act on this?
I think it's up to Joe Manchin, unfortunately, and I think we're going to get more information about the text of the bill this week, and fingers crossed on that. I think what I would like to see is, this isn't my analogy, but it's one that I've heard frequently. A lot of these billionaires, it's almost a Batman situation where they, the company that like Wayne Enterprises, where they make all their money, causes all these problems for society, and then you have to have the billionaire Batman go out and stop all the consequences from it. Personally, what I would like to see is more money taken from the billionaires, where we as the public can kind of decide which way this goes. And just one more thing about this, Robert, as long as we're talking about the nitty-gritty details of how we actually do something like this in space, one of the things that we've tried to figure out for a long time is how to stop the loss of muscle mass in space, because you go up there and your muscles atrophy. And one of the things that I'm so proud of my husband for is, while he was working at Novartis here in Boston, his name is actually, he helped develop the patent for one of the drugs that's going to do this. They came up with the drug, and you can literally, according to the patent, it causes you to just automatically generate all this muscle mass. And they see it and they're like, oh my gosh, people are going to be using this to abuse sports, and it's going to like blow all
I would
these.
say that was my first thought as well.
Right. Yeah.
No, I'm training for space.
Right. But this drug could be very helpful for getting us long-term letting humans live in space. So
it's
I'm
interesting. We have a bunch
that.
of drugged up astronauts who are managing to. But I mean, it is a serious problem. It takes 6 to 9 months to get to Mars. Same to come back. That's an awful lot of muscle mass to lose. And particularly if you're, I mean, also thinking longer term, if you're actually born on Mars and you grow up with that kind of gravitational stress, you probably couldn't come back to Earth unless you've got some serious muscle development going on, because the gravity would just crush you. I mean, is it, if we're going to become a spacefaring species, as I hope that we do, it's obviously going to take some fairly serious physiological changes in humanity. And also, sort of where are we going in terms of how that's going to equalize out when things get back to Earth. But I have to say, Brianna, when you told me about that drugs, my first thought was pro sports people are going to be on this like a rat up a drain pipe.
100%. If I'm remembering it correctly, they were trying to figure out ways to let sports teams try to detect it ahead of time, because they knew it was going to be such a thing that would be abused.
So put a marker in the drug so that
way.
it shows up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They could also help elderly people, right? You fall and break a hip, it's because you lose muscle mass. So there we go.
Yeah, we shall have to see. But yeah, well, hopefully we'll get out there. We're starving in the midst of plenty at the moment, considering that most asteroids contain enough metals to deal with the markets for quite some time. But still, readers have pointed out that, of course, we could have the spinning space stations that would engender a certain amount of gravity, but that requires a massive space station to actually get it organised. I mean, I love 2001, but we're a long, long way from that. Arthur C. Clarke actually. Oh, sorry. Go on, Padre.
We don't actually have the material science to do that yet. Spinning a space station is a way to generate a force that will resemble gravity, but the force that you would experience on the hub of that spinning structure would tear any current material to pieces. So it looks great in sci-fi, but not incredibly practical. There actually is a show that deals with this really, really well. If you've read the Expanse series of books, or even watched the show, that's actually something that it builds into it. That was Abraham put that into the writing of the show. So that much is actually realistic.
That's interesting, because I mean, when Arthur C. Clarke always regretted the introduction of the transistor, because when his idea for satellites was based on valve technology, and that's why he thought that manned space technology manned space flight would become essential, basically, for the maintenance of satellites, because somebody would need to swap out the vacuum tubes. And once they broke, and in later years, he was kind of like, the transistor really mucked that up. You can just send machinery up there now. It's painful, but yes.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Tech, 847, the Orbital Reef Space Station idea. And Father Robert Ballister kind of coming in with the cold water on a lot of things, talking about things I hadn't really heard much about, like the big limitations in space was, the solar power was generating relatively small amounts of power, and other methods of generating power tend to require the ability to get rid of heat, which is a difficulty in space travel. And also, centrifugal gravity is not as easy as it looks, that it would tend to rip apart things that we know how to build right now. A couple of things I hadn't heard before. So just a nice kind of mind candy there for the end of the show. And with that, you've done it again. You spent an hour talking about tech and how a better understanding of it can lead to better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. I hope you'll join us to continue these conversations next Wednesday and every Wednesday, noon to 1 o'clock, for Northwest Tech Show.